In this video, we're going to talk about 4 different types of descriptive statistics that we can use for one categorical variable: frequency, proportional frequency, cumulative frequency, and cumulative proportional frequency. So if you remember from the previous video, we could see the frequency counts for any of our variables within a data frame by passing the data frame through the summary function. And we can look at specific variables by using the summary function and using the $ notation. So as an example, we can use the summary function on the SE-MPMA data frame, and specifically if we want to look at item 1, we'll use the $ notation. And we see here that we have the frequency counts for each of the levels within the item 1 variable. Now another function that we can use is the table function. So if we use the table function on item 1, we see again that we get the same data. However, the difference is that with the table function, the class of the output of the table function is a table, as opposed to the class of the summary function, which is an integer class. Now this is going to be important because when we're working with a categorical variable, particularly when we're going to be plotting it, we want the data to be in table form. So let's take this table function and let's store it in an object. We'll call the object item1_table. Now if we call on this object, once again we see the same output, and then if we check the class, we see that it's a table. Again, this is going to be important when we work with the data later, when we visualize the data. Now, in addition to reporting frequency, we may also want to report proportional frequency, which is the proportion of responses for each level. Now, we can calculate the proportional frequency by using the prop.table function. And again, we'll pass in the table object that we created earlier. And we see here the proportional frequencies for each category. So 0.02 or 2% of the total responses to item 1 were strongly disagree. 39.3% of the total responses were disagree. 43.3% of the responses were agree. And 15.3% of the responses were strongly agree. Now with this data, in order to report them, we'd like to round them to 2 decimal places. So we can simply pass this in through the round function and specify digits is equal to 2. And we see that the output includes nice rounded numbers. Now let's store this in an object. We're going to store it in an object called item1_prop_freq. And then if we take a look at the class, we see again that it's a table. Now we can also calculate cumulative frequency, which include the total number of observations for each level, in addition to each of the previous levels in their respective monotonic order. So in order to calculate cumulative frequency, we can use the cum_sum function. And again, we'll pass in the item1table object that we created earlier. And we see here that a total of 3 observations were for strongly disagree. A total of 62 observations include disagree and strongly disagree. A total of 127 observations include agree, disagree, and strongly disagree. And we have a total of 150 observations or responses to item 1. Now again, we can store this in an object. Let's store it in an object called item1_sum_freq. And now if we take a look at the class of this, we see that it's an integer class. And that's okay for what we're using it for here. Now the last piece of data that we can report is the cumulative proportional frequency. Now that's calculated by dividing the cumulative frequency by the number of responses. So here again, if we remember, the cumulative frequency we calculated using the cum_sum function. Now the total number of observations is equal to the number of rows in our data frame. And we can gather that information by using the nRow function. So we pass in our data frame, SE-MPMA, through our nRow function. And we see that we have a total of 150 observations. So in order to calculate the cumulative proportional frequency, we'll divide cum_sum by our n rows of our data frame. And now we have the cumulative proportional frequency. Now again, we can round these. We'll use the round function. We'll use 2 digits. And then let's store this in an object. We'll call the object item1 cum_prop_frequency. Now if we want to report these, a good way to do them all together is that we can store them into one matrix. So let me clear this out. Make a little room. Let's call this item1 freq matrix. To combine all of these together, we'll use the cbind function. And the first column we'll put in the matrix, we'll call it frequency, equal, and then we'll put in our frequency table. So item1 table. Let's break the code to keep it a little easier to read. So next we want to add the proportional frequency. Let's call the name of the column prop frequency. And we see that we've stored it in item prop freq. So I'll just paste that in. Next we can put the cumulative frequency. So let's call that column cumulative frequency. And we have that stored in our object here. And then last, we want to add the cumulative proportional frequency. So let's call the column cum prop frequency. And we have that stored in our object here. Okay, let's print the command. And now if we call in our new object, we see that we have the frequency, proportional frequency, cumulative frequency, and cumulative proportional frequency all stored nice in a table.